plagued us for months on end from March till now. But we do have a chance now to sit down and talk and discuss the work of evangelism. But as I try to do every time we begin, simple question for Terry: how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, Phil. How are you doing?
Doing all right. I will immediately indicate that James and I began to make use of our newly acquired by a very kind friend, some workout equipment in our garage. And so we've got a squat rack and some stuff in there. And my arms feel kind of like noodles right now.
I saw pictures
So,
of that and
um,
have no interest to come and join you. So
visitors are welcome, screening upon entry, and we'll be happy to seek the gains. In a little while, at the top of the hour, we're going to be talking about a revisit to visitors in the congregational context. But before we do that, I think this is a pretty simple question for a lot of folks. Terry and I have been doing this for a while in a lot of our online studies and just having a simple question. And so, my question for Terry today is, what was your first car, and how do you feel about that car?
I don't. You sure you haven't asked this before?
I don't think so.
Okay, so my first car was a 1984 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme two door, white with a blue vinyl Landau cover, blue velour interior, wood grain trim, and it had those white sport mag wheels that the insides were painted with chrome trim to match the car. 307 Oldsmobile with a quadrajet in it, lifted a little bit in the back from the factory. It was fantastic. Totaled that car, sadly. Got hit from behind into a moving truck. Replaced it with a 1987 Camaro that was red. So my first two cars were fast and my favorites, but the Olds Cutlass is probably my favorite ever. Um, there may or may not be the thought in my head at some point that I would find one of those to restore, but we'd have to get rid of kids and a whole lot of other people at this point. So,
Maybe some challenges there.
yeah.
So, my first automobile that I purchased with cash earned was a 1951 Ford four door. And For those who are unfamiliar with what that car looks like, just take a bathtub and turn it upside down.
Yeah.
In this particular case, you would also want to paint it a nice forward light blue. And we had every intention of turning that into a rat rod and started working through the primer paint and planning to chop the roof and do a bunch of stuff. And college needs got in the way of that. And so we ended up selling it to a friend, actually in trade. I still love the look of that car. I love rat rod versions of that car.
Yeah.
But I traded it for a 1980 Chevy El Camino SS. Uh, Easily way too fast for
Yeah.
a high
Yeah.
school kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Easily.
I had a chance to buy an El Camino one time that had a blueprint motor. For those that don't know what that means, it's basically a custom rig, which means super fast, and wisely avoided that. But yeah, I mean, I had some people wonder why I got such a nice car because it was really nice. I mean, it looked great. For those who don't know, my dad died when I was 16, and I guess technically my first car was a Chevette, but that was actually shared with my dad.
Mhm.
So my first actual car was the Cutlass, and obviously part of that was because of insurance settlement and stuff that allowed me to have that because it was a rarity in my family. You didn't get nice cars when you were a teenager, so my first car was a really nice car for a kid my age at that time, especially because that was 1991. So, it was relatively a new car, nice car, fast car. But anyway, the Olds Cutlass, by the way, I mourned the day that they did away with the Oldsmobile line because there's a lot of history with that. So,
Yeah, I had a Oldsmobile Delta 88 that I took to Florida College with me.
I
Um,
remember that.
yeah. So I've
That's like
had
a
more than a few
grandma car,
cars.
dude.
Well, I think I was like the fifth preacher to own that vehicle,
Yeah.
and so it had worked its way through the
The car I absolutely hated
broke
the
preacher
most was
fund.
The car I absolutely hated the most was the car I took to Florida College. I don't know if you remember. It was a four-door white Corsica. It and
I do
and
have a vague
so
remembrance.
my mom actually told me one night. It was on. I remember it was a Thursday night before the end of the school year, my senior year, and I was on an orientation team. I had to go to school and orientate the incoming freshmen. And my mom said, "Drive the van," and I came home to a white Corsica in the driveway and my red Camaro gone. And I just got to be honest. I felt like that as an 18-year-old male going to college, that my mom pretty much neutered me at that point. That's how it felt, to be kind, because you go from a sports car to a four-door family car with a four-cylinder motor in it that literally is garbage. Yeah, that was not a welcome sight in the driveway. Let's put it that way. But I had no choice.
So our subject for today, and I don't want to get into my deep automotive angst. I've had more than a few vehicles, and some of them I miss more than others.
Yeah, let's not get into it because I'm like driving my dream truck now, and that would be here all day.
Yeah. Um, so I think it was probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. Terry and I sat down and talked a little bit about the structure that each of us try to follow, both independently of the congregation's work and then dependent in congregational work, in regards to visitors to our assemblies, contacts for evangelism. And Shane Scott, who should magically appear in the chat at some point, because he said he had questions and wanted to see what we had to say about the subject. If he doesn't, everyone could shame him.
Shame, Shane.
Shame Shane.
He is probably stuck somewhere in the mushy middle right now.
Actually, he's probably fixing his hair because for the prima donna that he is.
Yes.
But he had some questions about it, and he thought it might be an interesting conversation. And so, blame Shane. There he is.
Yep, he's here.
So I wanted to talk today just a little bit about some transition aspects of then versus now, and trying to be effective in that. I know we've talked about some of that as well over the last 8 to 12 months. But we want to look forward to the future too, because whatever was the past isn't necessarily the present nor the future. And so some things at the top level, and we'll talk about this right now, Terry, that we were doing before simply aren't fitting into the practical work. Personally, we don't have the same small group studies running that we used to, so that evangelistic tool isn't on the table right now. We also don't have the same in-home growth opportunities for person to person, family to family that we did before, for all kinds of reasons, not just health reasons. And so we need to set those off to the side for us. What about you guys on that structured level?
Well, we have just tried to start back small group things, but they're a little bit more random than they were before. They're outdoors in order to properly social distance, because the state I'm in Alabama is currently in their largest spike since the beginning of September, and so we try to watch those things, be mindful, cautious, not fearful, I think is the right approach there. And as far as inviting people into your home, I don't think there's a lot of that going on right now. We leave that up to our members. But I do know some members that have done some, probably more along the lines of going out to eat. They feel a little safer that way, and trying to maintain some of that. But it's not like it was. Things are different. And I think that's pretty much the case everywhere. For a long time, I don't know about you guys, but for a long time, we weren't even really using visitor cards anymore to gather information, just because we were trying to cut down on the amount of things that were passed out. We've relaxed that a little bit lately, and have started using those visitor cards and just trying to be cautious about, washing hands and those kind of things.
Right.
And the follow-up, as far as sending cards and that kind of stuff, that's still the same. And we can talk about how we handle those things this morning and review kind of some of that. But it is different. It did cause me to do a little brainstorming, and the difficulty is there's nothing really out there unless you get it tailor-made for you that fits this need. But I would love for at some point, or maybe I'm just not aware of it, and if somebody is, send me a message. I'd love for some point to go to a more digital version of a visitor's card where you can have it that you do all of that on your phone. The majority of people, not all, but the majority of people have a smartphone. If we had some kind of check-in kind of app, maybe that's
A
the
ton of
future.
those. I know that the Nucleus product, which is it's like a larger platform system, similar to Congregate, but it tends to live in a different congregational setting, and
Yeah,
so you don't see it amongst the churches Terry and I would be connected to.
because it's a
But they
bigger
have
part of a bigger package to use that. That's one of the
right,
issues.
but um, a simple submission form works the same way. And so you can create a page on your Congregate site that allows you to have 4 or 5 different boxes and
Yeah.
it just submits.
Yeah, we've
Um,
not done that yet, but I was thinking more along the lines of a more direct check-in way than going to a page. But anyway, that's
right.
I think that's something that we're going to have to consider in the future. By the way, is a more digital check-in kind of method for visitors than an actual visitor card in that
Right.
sense.
And here's the thing. One of the things I'm working on the back end of trying to figure out how to do it well, and this is a visitor confidence thing, is using NFC, near field communication, to create a little thing where you can move your phone, your watch, or your whatever by it, and then it will pop up a little note
Right.
card that lets you right on your phone enter that information, and it's an optional thing. It's very similar to just getting a little visitor card. Hey, could you just swipe your phone by this and it will pop up. Now, not everyone wants to do that. Not every phone does that. And so
Yeah.
that's the concept that I'm thinking from, similar to what Terry's doing there to try
Well,
to.
the issue becomes is security, right? We also want to make people feel comfortable with
Right.
the security issues or the perceived security issues that come along with that process. So
Right.
that's something. If we find a good solution that's seems to be people are comfortable with, and it may just be the submission form on a web page. I don't know.
Right.
We'll see.
Right.
I know larger groups do that. What we might call mega churches will do that with tied to a kind of drawing of sorts, and obviously we don't want to be any part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there's some things like you said for a much larger scale that are part of bigger packages. And for us, at least, we're very comfortable with Congregate as far as that goes, and the price point and all of those things involved. So, all that to say, like everything else, COVID has changed how we do things. It's changed things there in Georgia. It's changed things here. I don't know of a church that it's not affected in some way, and especially in the way it comes to visitors. I mean, one of the weird things for me at this point, and I don't know you feel, is when we have a visitor, I typically don't shake their hands anymore, which feels really odd, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's our normal greeting.
Yeah.
And the fist bump feels weird, So from that, but then you feel like you're not very hospitable when you're standing there with your hands in your pocket and a mask on, saying, "Hey, great to have you." I mean, it has caused a challenge, even in how you greet people that probably we weren't prepared for.
Right. And just say on a personal level, I try to make that a moment to where I can remember their names. I inject things. If I know them a little bit ahead of time, I might ask them if which of the 15 different COVID appropriate greetings would I like to engage in, the foot tap, the fist bump, the elbow tash, you know,
Yeah.
'cause I'm trying to, for on a personal level, make a connection that will help me accomplish a couple of key things. One, remember their name. That's a really important investment in somebody, is to give them the designation of whom they are. But secondly, also create a conversational piece where when I decide that I want to go to the next step and say, hey, I'd love to see you next Sunday or Wednesday in our in-person studies that we're about to start at Eastside, or etc.
Yeah.
I want that.
Yeah.
And so I want to be able to make that ask. And so on a structural level, that's what I'm going for. Um, for the bigger package of things, it's really important to be comfortable building a network of participants around you to delegate tasks to.
Yeah.
That you're not telling or managing them. This is the area of the congregation's evangelism that we need your help in. And what we need your
Right.
help with is this. How can you fit into this space? And so that's going to vary congregation to congregation. There are some
Yes. So
groups.
So one
Go
of the
ahead,
things
Sam.
we've done, by the way, is we've added deacons during quarantine, which is a weird process, by the way. But we knew we needed more people, and especially, I don't know about for you, Phil, but there were some things along the lines of the quarantine process when we came back that there was a lot of responsibilities that were going to be added onto those guys, and they needed some more help to shoulder some of that load. Just the setup alone when we were outside was quite a burden, and they did a fantastic job. But we have a group of those deacons that are on what we call the guest evangelism team for exactly the reason that you stated. You, the preacher cannot do all this by himself. Now, I'm a believer. By the way, I've been in a place where we had the guest evangelism team, and the preacher was not really that active in that, and that was me, just because I was asked to do some of the things. And quite frankly, I don't know that that is effective. I think the preacher more than likely needs to be involved in that directly, but there needs to be a group of guys, especially, and then underneath and deacons, I think, and then underneath those deacons, an even larger task force of card writers and phone callers and other people that you know are willing to do these tasks. That you can have a strategic, organized approach to greeting your guest and handling your guest post visit. And for you to handle all that by yourself is probably unwise. So this is something that typically for us is a secondary deacon assignment. That they have other responsibilities besides this that they handle for us, but this is one of their responsibilities for sure.
Right. And it's important to kind of clarify all that stuff that you may have a deacon kind of running the overall basket of things, but you're going to then pull the members in different ways. And so at Eastside,
Right.
we have one of the sisters who is really concerned with making sure that every single visitor is intentionally connected to a member writing them a visitor thank you type card, like thanks
Right.
for being here. And for Eastside again, those roles, who's going to write those cards, are monthly slots of assignment where you're going to have a month where you're going to do that. And you're going to make sure that they're going to give you those addresses, they're going to give you those contacts. You're going to write it on behalf of the congregation. You may or may not sign it personally, depending on a number of factors. And that's like a guaranteed must happen thing. But there's other things in that umbrella that are important in the same way of making individuals understand the relationships that are available to them. Because evangelism is not just let me tell you the story of Jesus. It
Yeah.
is let me show you the people who believe that Jesus is the Christ and learn about how they care about one another. Because to
Yeah.
me, that's an equally powerful evangelistic pull.
You need to know what your goal is with a visitor. And the goal we have with our guest evangelism team, our goal is as a team is that we want to build relationships with the visitors. We want to build more relationships, not just with the collective church, but between individuals. So one of the tasks that we try to fulfill, and it's a little harder now, we got to start doing this again. We've not been doing this, but we normally carry a list of the visitors for the last 6 weeks in our pockets. And what we do in the process of that is that helps us remember names, and there's some information down there with those visitors. But then in the process of that, we take that information and we try to make connections. It may be geographical, like we may have somebody visit from down near Harpersville, and we have another family that lives in Harpersville, so we'll purposely connect the two of them together. If we have somebody in their 20s, we're going to purposely connect them with one of our families in their 20s. If we have somebody who's a teacher, we're going to purposely connect them with another teacher. And by the way, those connections are going to happen repeatedly. We're going to try to do a handoff move to different people every time they're there. And the idea then is that hopefully they'll build some kind of connection and we can cultivate these relationships, that through those relationships they get to know more of God's people. And if they're not Christians, then we can eventually, when the timing is right, and I think that's a judgment call, by the way. I don't think you can put a number of days or visits on that, that we then translate that into a Bible study of some sort. And but really and truthfully, so much of your visitors and the way you handle visitors, you need to focus on the fact that that is really about relationship building. It is not about a Bible study. The Bible study can come if you build the relationship. And that's, I think, one of the most key factors in all of this to understand what your goal is when you handle a visitor.
Yeah, and all of these things are not hyper complicated. You're not like reinventing the wheel. You're giving a purpose to an event that already takes place. And by the way, Paul, I'm sorry I can't answer your Logos chat questions because we are live at this time. But as always, we take questions in the stream, and so maybe I can solve it off the side. But it's good to have you jumping in here.
Yeah.
So on the other aspects of this, I want to touch on a couple of things I think are important little side tips. I talked about before saying, well, this is what we were doing before. We had our group studies, we had some in-home structure set up, and Terry kind of tipped the hat to you don't have to end those things, you have to shift those things. And so before I give a couple of things to think about, here's something really important and something I'm trying to be really good about, even though I'm not at the point where I want to be. I don't think it's an appropriate approach evangelistically to talk about things, well, when they get back to normal, or when we return to this, to return to that. That's not the safe harbor I'm going for, because I have no idea what tomorrow looks for. When Jesus tells us, when Paul tells us that each day has enough trouble of its own, then let's do more of that. And so while I would love to have a more broad palette to pick from to paint evangelism on the wall, this is what I've got right now.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what's going to be like. Maybe I get some more colors. Sweet, more colors are great. But with the colors that are available today, Terry hit on one, outdoor dining makes people at ease. Because again, the goal isn't for me to insert my perceptions or fears of the safety of the American construct. Like, that's not my goal with evangelism, is to make them more or less American. My goal is to find a comfortable space where they're comfortable and I'm willing to be uncomfortable to sit down and talk about God. And so places that tend to allow that really easily, outdoor dining does that pretty easily. You can kind of create some space there. It's a little bit more comfortable. Outdoor coffee spots. Lean into your outdoor experiences too, like hiking, walking, family conversations, walk your kids together, walk your dogs together. All of these things are doors for evangelism that have a different label on it. Well, that's not evangelism. It absolutely is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's because it's that connection of relationships. And, you know, one of the things that's important about being present where you're at instead of talking about when we get back to normal is, depending on what your congregation is doing, it is very likely that some of the people visiting with you are there because of what you're doing. We have had several visitors because of how we've chosen to do things that have come and spent time with us. And so the reason I think that's important is you got to realize then from purely a talking point way, then to talk down about where you're at or to be negative about that when that's the reason they're with you kind of is counterproductive. So one of the things one of the talking points I do with guests is I because I don't know which side they're on. And by the way, we've had people visit with us that are on both pro-mask, anti-mask, all sides of this issue. What I've really tried to focus on is just to give them a brief kind of recap. Hey, here's why we're doing what we're doing, which for us is some people outside, some people inside. Which brings me back to that as leadership, our congregation has made the point that they're trying to give everybody a place where they feel comfortable where they're at, and that peace is our goal, which is a great talking point for somebody who's visiting with you. This is a group that is focused on peace and is focused on trying to have peace in one of the more difficult, by the way, I say this to people all the time, this has been the hardest time as a preacher I have faced in 23 years. And I think Phil would agree with that. And it has nothing to do with the gospel. It's not even spiritual. It's just the 2020, with all that it has brought, has been the most stressful time for church leadership in my lifetime because of non-spiritual things. And it's okay to express that to people. And it's okay to talk about, here's why we're at, and here's what we're doing, and here's where we plan to be eventually. Our small groups right now are more outside and a little bit more sporadic. Our goal is to get back to where everybody's more comfortable to do that on a regular basis. That's okay to say, hey, normally this is where you'd be, but now here's what we've adjusted with those too. We want you to know how those are working. So we tried to show in that sense, in those talking points to people, here are the slight changes, here are the things that we're doing, here's how we're thinking. And by the way, sharing that kind of thought process allows a visitor into the heart of your congregation. Here's why the leadership made this decision. It's okay to talk that way. In fact, I would encourage you to do that. That helps them understand who they're talking to and what they're dealing with.
Right. And so to kind of tie it to the past, present, future model, in the past, I tended to have a 10-week kind of hope plan. Like not everyone would fall into this 10, they would be there 10 weeks in a row kind of thing. But each of those weeks, there was a different stop mark in our efforts to work with them. I wanted them to meet some of the wonderful members of the congregation in a personal setting, but I also wanted them to meet the leadership in the congregation in a personal setting. And I wanted them to understand that I'm ready and willing to sit down and open a Bible with them, as are all of these people. And so we
Yeah.
kind of had different ways to accomplish that goal. You don't have to end that. And let me just drop a little of reality right now. As much as we are hyper concerned with today, think about your neighbors right now. In many places around our area, and I don't know if it's the same for Terry, um, some of the Methodist groups, as an example, still haven't really structurally moved to an in-person assembly of any kind.
Hmm.
Some have. The same is true for some of the nearby Baptist groups, some of the nearby larger megachurch groups of various types. If there was ever a time that someone could go assemble with you on the first day of the week and not have a conflict in time, it's right now.
Yeah.
It's like the time to do that, and they're probably more inclined to go because they haven't gone to what they know they want to do on a regular basis. And
Right.
so it's a great open door to get people to come. Like if there ever was a better time, I don't know of it. So this
But
transition
here's
phase we're in is great.
yeah, here's the key to that for members especially, which is all of us, right? When I say members, I mean church leaders too, right? It's not some kind of clergy laity distinction. I mean all of us. The key to that being possible is for all of us to talk positively about how our churches have handled this situation rather than complaining to our friends about how that it has been handled. You may not like some of the things that your leadership has chosen to do, but when you complain to your friends in the community that don't go to church with you about those things, about your church, you're actually working against what our goal is here. So you've got to find some positive ways to talk about how your church has handled things. And it may just be that you disagree with them, but at least you can appreciate the amount of effort they've put into whatever decision they've made. But you've got to speak favorably. And that by the way, Phil, let me say this. That, by the way, is key to any time about the congregation you attend. I have seen people get online and complain about their preacher on their page or complain about their church. And I just want to go and say, what are you doing? Because what you're saying is, hey, none of y'all go to church with me. I go to church with a bunch of nuts people. Don't come to church with me. Don't listen to me about church because I'm a bad source of information. Like, you need to think positively and speak positively about your congregation through your social media, through phone calls, through every way you communicate. All of that has to be positive because right now, like Phil said, is a great time for people who want to assemble somewhere and don't have the opportunity. If you're saying, well, our elders have held to this really well, they're trying to really take care of everybody and try to socially distance, but also give us the opportunity to worship. Love for you to come and find out. It's that simple. Praise your congregation publicly so people want to come be a part of that.
Right. And here's something kind of a rational point. For years, at times, Christians I've known and Christians Terry's known, and maybe even Terry and I individually, have kind of at times felt like maybe we're doing too much. Maybe there's too many studies, too many of this, too many of that, and people don't seem to be interested. And then some places their Sunday evening services had limited attendance, or their Wednesday night services had limited attendance. The tables have flipped, where for the most part, everybody I know wants more in-person participation. And I think that's something for us to really get a good handle on, to get a good understanding on. Hey, look, we can engage forward-thinking thoughts. And I'll clarify one more thing with Terry's prior comment. Just because you're emphasizing the good that a group is doing doesn't mean you don't you agree with every single decision. and that you
Sure.
can't disagree, but you're actually putting emphasis of the information going to the right ears. So if you're not comfortable with the leadership's decisions, then go to the leadership, ask for clarity, offer to serve. Hey, what can I do to make this adjustment more successful? Give them that information because you'll get a better outcome there. And then to the outside, says, this is what we're doing right now. I know nobody thought this was going to be the case, but isn't it great that we're doing this?
Yeah.
Um, you're balancing these things evangelistically. And to the visitor that's caught in the middle, remember, they didn't make any choices about any of that. They
Right.
didn't choose the congregation's approach to it. They didn't choose the nation's approach to it. They are there for a myriad of reasons that you can't gauge. And so it is really vital at that point in time to realize that you are probably the first representation of what a loving Christian can be in those conversations. Be accessible, be open, be transparent, be real, and be reflective. I think those are a lot of things that we could do better at in this process of working with and structurally figuring out guest to student to disciple to believer.
Yeah, and those connections that you used to try to make by, like, let's say you wanted to get an elder to invite a guest out to lunch or something, those connections can still be made. They just have to be made in the parking lot at this point. And then you leave that in the hands of the elder. If he feels comfortable asking that family to go to lunch and they feel comfortable, then I'm never going to stop that. But I'm not going to ask anything either that could be across the line. And at the same time, I'm still going to try to make those connections. They're just going to happen in the parking lot. They're just going to be something that's a little bit more brief, but hopefully makes a connection that in the coming weeks, if they come back and visit, then they remember that person. And every week you add another person to that list of people that they know. And in addition, for instance, we have something coming up this weekend. One of our members does every year at a community center, which is our trunk or treat. It's not. It's a great time for the kids. It's a little competition. It's fun. All the people that have been visiting with us, I will make sure they know about that event. We want them to come. It's outside. You're socially distanced properly because you're at your car. There's a lot of things along those lines that, as far as it goes for what we're doing right now with all of the threat of everything, it's about the best case scenario. And it's something that we're doing, so we want to invite them. Again, they don't have to come. Two things: if they're comfortable with it and they come, they're going to get to know some folks. But if they aren't comfortable and they don't come, at least they know they had an opportunity and an invitation, and there are things going on that, again, take everything into account. We're trying to do things in a safe, nice way that everybody feels comfortable. So I think that's important, to think about those kinds of things as you go forward. I know of a church that does a really neat thing. I don't know if you're aware of this. You probably are, Phil. That they, as a congregation, get together and they have a Thanksgiving meal every year. And this year, because of COVID, they weren't going to be
I
able
know
to do
two
that.
churches that do that actually. They do
The
the
one
same
that I
thing.
know is where Ryan's at.
Right.
They just did it this past weekend outside so they could still do it. Well, if we were doing that, which I think is a great idea, I'd like to organize, not this year, but at some point maybe for even us. But if we were going to do that and we had that set aside, any of our visitors in the last couple of weeks, we try to get them to be there. We want them to be a part of that. Those kind of things are important, is all I'm saying, to try to get them connected at the assemblies and away from the assemblies. That's important to do that any way that you can.
Yeah, and I think again, creative problem solving has to continue to be part of our evangelistic process. And so going back to some of Shane's questions, which he hasn't really asked too many specific questions. So either we're completely loading up with things of good ideas, or he's got too much
Has
Aquanet
he
going
asked a
on.
question? Because I don't see a
No,
question.
no, he just has made comments, to Shane level,
Something about the
WWE.
moneymaker.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, is again take that same model of before, where you've got a plan. I got 10 weeks, let's say, of what I want to accomplish for each person that I come in, and you have one of the members maybe manages that 10-week plan, and you're just replacing what you're putting in there to create those opportunities. Um, and no one person should bear the entirety of that. And it doesn't even have to be structured. Right now for Eastside, we
Right.
don't have it heavily structured for a lot of very specific reasons. One has to do with the nature of our group right now. I go and mention it to one of the deacons. Hey, this needs to take care of, and our deacons are wonderful guys, and boom, it just gets taken care of. And I don't. There's no micromanaging. They handle it. They do the thing, and it perpetuates itself. Let me add a couple more things to kind of sum up some of this process. Again, refine the goal when you're doing a task. Like, what do we actually want as the outcome for this? If your outcome is to simply create a time where someone will hear the story of Jesus, that's a great outcome. But you may have already done that, because if you're preaching in a way that brings Jesus, and that's been done. So now you have a new set of goals. Like, they've already heard about Jesus. What do I need them to know in this transition phase from guest/visitor to disciple/believer? Like, how do I make that transition? And again, those relationships are key. You've got to build a connection to the people who are part of that community beyond the person who invited them there. Because in some cases, their invitation may have been completely independent of the physical body there, and serve in a way that demonstrates, yes, we love Jesus, and you can see it in our relationships. There's a lot of interconnected aspects of that to the health of the congregation, but I think it's something that we can be good at. And, again, from the preaching side of point, we move over to the preacher table for a second. Your messages should be crafted in a way that allows both the visitor to be fed and the person who is the most deep thinker in the flock to be fed. And so you've got to find a way to make your lessons bridge those very two far apart spots. Like, they're two different things. Obviously, I'm going to advocate for expository preaching to solve the problem, but keep that in mind. Like, those are things that I think are important, that are part of evangelism, is making sure you're hitting those high points.
Yeah, and one of the things to keep in mind is, if the goal of this is, ultimately the goal is to bring those who are lost to Christ. But I think one of the key things when it comes to visitors is, we always want to view that as get them to a Bible study, get them to a Bible study. And what we're saying is, yeah, that's the ultimate goal, but the easier route to that is often the relationships and connection with the church family. There have been times where somebody was convinced we were their church and told people that's my church, but they had never obeyed the gospel. And what was really interesting is, by the time we were able to have that study, they obeyed that night. Like, it was not difficult, right? And I know part of that was because they knew these were good people. They wanted this to be their family, and they were more willing to listen because of that. Now, but one of the things as a preacher and leadership you've got to keep in mind is, for that to work, your church has to be in the healthy condition that people would want to be a part of it. If your church is full of negativity and fighting and backbiting, this ain't going to work for you. It's just not. And if that's where you're at, then you need to do some church healing, to use that terminology. You need to fix the fellowship of the existing brethren before you invite anybody else into that fellowship. And that's the hard part of that, because the reality is sometimes churches aren't growing because nobody would want to be a part of that group of people the way they're acting. So keep that in mind, that in order for this to work, really, you got to be the kind of people that they want to be around. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to be effective.
We're trying to manifest the character of God in our relationships, and that should create an inviting environment for folks to participate in. These are just a few thoughts. This is not one of our more in-depth, more technical things, but it does kind of highlight a couple of key principles to make a plan, your own localized plan, because obviously each congregation is going to have its own specific strengths to pull from. So sit down and figure out, what are we good at? Okay, how can we use those in areas to improve our evangelistic reach and to improve the relationships that we are already a part of? Because here's something interesting. This is the side benefit of building a plan like this. The people who are part of the congregation that maybe don't have roles to serve in the traditional public settings now are given actually the participation part of one of the most important roles in the congregation. I will tell you most specifically, and this is just me kind of ranting for a second, I guess, it is more important to have your best minds involved in evangelism than your best mind handing out a tray on Sunday morning. The best hearts can do both of those jobs. That's a separate level. And it's not to denigrate the role in the Lord's Supper, because that's an important one too. But fundamentally, the best minds need to be involved in the things that build the best strength for the flock. And these relationships you build in evangelism are one of those most important things.
Yeah, and if you're going to put together a team of people to greet guests, they probably need to be people, right? You need to have people involved in this work that are willing to do it and are active and like to talk to people. And so
different genders,
people,
different ages.
Yeah, choose people wisely. In fact, what we try to do is we try to get families involved in that. Like when we're doing when we have greeters under normal circumstances, we want the whole family to greet. We want their kids. We want them to be there. We want everybody to be there greeting, because you want to see more than just a guy at the door. So, Hal asked a good question. Does theme and marketing streamline the process of members learning how to interact with visitors? Yes and no. I mean, from one sense, look at East Shelby. Wow, that goes back. At Chelsea, we're pretty clear. We have for those who don't know, we have a logo that's a blue heart. It has 4 parts. We call that the heart of discipleship. And our members are pretty aware of those 4 areas. Our leadership is very aware, because that's what our meetings focus on. And so that does a little bit, but really and truthfully, you just want in this process, Hal, you just want people to like people. Like I think that's the key to all of this. This isn't about marketing. Marketing is kind of the things that will take this further when you're not together, and kind of how you write your cards and notes as a preacher, or maybe what you say in a study, those kind of things. But this is really just about loving people. I think that's the thing is to understand is when we talk about what we deal with visitors, it's really just about liking folks. It's not that hard. It doesn't take a lot of training. It's just about liking people and realizing, hey, that's a soul there. We want to be in fellowship with them. So that's the easiest answer for me, is it's just about liking people.
Yeah, and I'll add this a couple of quick tidbits. This is a great thing to workshop in small group settings.
Sure.
Hey, what are we going to do when a visitor comes? And you may have people like, we've got Bobby and Mary Williams, who are part of the church at Eastside. They have long held a simple practice that every single person on Sunday or Wednesday, when they are there, they go personally greet them, like clockwork. And they're people, and they'll talk to them and they'll get to know them. Even though when you talk to like Mary, she's very uncomfortable with it, but she knows that she can at least do that. And that's her own words. And she does so much more, but she set that as a goal for her. And so you have these small workshop settings where let's talk about it. Let's improve this area. We do this great. Let's do it greater kind of approach. For the theme and marketing process, it can streamline. It kind of depends. The one advantage you can have is that if folks want to, they can know what you're going to preach ahead of time. So without even checking with you, they'll know, hey, it's going to be this part of it's the second Sunday of the month. So next year, that probably means that Philip's going to be dealing with Revelation. Want to hear about Revelation? We're going to be in, they'll know that. It's a conversation possibility, but it may not be the best one. And so it's going to come back to that person's personality.
Yeah, we don't want this to be so strategic and so streamlined that it's not personal anymore. And I think that's the challenge to you got to be careful about, that you don't overly train your people, to make this, we don't want them to feel like you just walked onto a car lot and this guy's been trained to intercept you before you get through the door. What can I do for you today? I mean, it's not that. We just want good old fashioned conversation, just people loving people. Like that's it. And I will say this, back when I was preaching twice on a Sunday, I would often dedicate at least one sermon a year to this subject to train our folks on what would have been traditionally the Sunday night assembly. And then later when we had 2 morning assemblies with sermons, it would have been the 9 o'clock, because that was where it was more of your core. And so we would take the time even from the pulpit to address this situation. and to talk about different areas of involvement. And here's the guys who are on this team. And one of the things I would tell people, by the way, was I would use the people in the back row that we often look at and go, why are they back there? I'd tell them, yeah, you're on the back row, you got a job. You're the safeties in football. The safety's job, if you're not aware, is you're the last person between that guy and the goal line. That's why you're called a safety. You're supposed to tackle that guy and not let him get to the goal line. Well, in church, I tell my people in the back row, if you have to tackle somebody to keep them in the building till I can meet them, that's your job. If you're going to sit back there, that's what your assignment is. Clog up the aisle, clog up the door, and let us get back there to meet the visitors before they escape. And I say it from the pulpit, So there's things like that you can do. You can do that in small groups as well. But there is an amount of just discussion and training that probably needs to go on with your members about things like that seems simple.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone for jumping into the conversation, Hal and Paul and others for your comments. It's good to see Phyllis and Charlene and Shane, with us
He's still
today.
combing his moneymaker, apparently.
Yeah, he's still making make sure every follicle is designated to its zone.
Follicle.
So we'll back again next Tuesday for some more conversation about the work of evangelists. Terry, last comments before we close out for today?
I just thank everybody for joining, and I hope everybody is doing great and staying safe, and thanks for joining us today.
Take care, all.